Something itself that's very old. It goes back to the 13th, 14th, 15th century, because sailors were always involved in a very particular kind of struggle. Partly it was a struggle against the press gang. The press gang led, sailors thought, to slavery, that is, to forced labor. So they always had a kind of anti-slavery ethic. They fought the press gangs, literally pitched battles in the streets, on the waterfront, in places like Liverpool, in Liverpool. It was a kind of war over the labor of the common sailor.
I've been asked this question before: why is Liverpool, the solidarity in Liverpool on issues, more prevalent than other cities in this country, and probably in many other countries? I just think it's because of the history. I mean, the history of the city.
This has manifested itself a lot of times over history, lots of different strikes, people going to Civil War, Spanish Civil War, and then in the 80s, throughout the Thatcher years, where now everyone now is like, oh, that's a terrible thing to do, voting for Thatcher, and it's like, well, we didn't.
Especially where we come from. I mean, it was just, you were brought up by, your grandfather and your father. You just don't take people's word for things. Authority is there, but you respect it, but you don't just take the word for things. And that's where I was brought up.
No matter what happened, you were the docker. There was no such, it was us and them.
And saying from the age of, when I was first born, my father, going down the docks, you don't do this, you don't do that, and you just brought up that way.
There's definitely a democratic and an egalitarian quality to the struggles of sailors, and of course they always loved to resist authority.
It was that militant. We stood by one another, that was it. It used to be a saying, if the two dockers on strike, I'd be one of them.
And there's been many issues over the last 40 or 50 years. The people of this city, just don't take things as read. You challenge things, and if you're in the wrong, well, fair enough, but at least you've got to challenge authority.
When I arrived on board, I was about a mile and 3/4 north of Point Linus, and this is the pilotage district with the westerly gales, and we are now progressing along this course towards the Liverpool bar. As we get closer, we come to the more problematic channel. It's like a funnel. Ships from the north and from the south and the west are funneling into a very narrow channel, which in its narrow part is well under half a mile. You're down to about 1,000 meters in places. Very narrow, but our timing is of the essence. We need to pass over this shallow patch, which basically, the river being self-swept outward bound through the channel, begins to deposit the sand near the bar, and then timing our arrival, a bit like an aeroplane coming to touch down for the swing and the eventual entrance into the Gladstone Lock. Our passage tonight shouldn't be too difficult if the wind doesn't come up further. Can be difficult to steer around the bend if you have a gale, but these ships handle remarkably well.
It's obviously got a strong, female identity, Liverpool, and I think it is to do with the fact that so many of the men were seafarers. That was the industry of the city.
Liverpool, like every other port, always had a tradition of female independence, and the main reason why is obvious. The men were gone for very large periods of time, and so consequently women essentially had to do everything. This was true in the United States, in the whaling ports, in the other maritime regions.
And the women were left to, basically bring up the kids and keep families going. And so just by their numbers, they must have been a very, very strong identity, especially in the dockland areas. And I mean, certainly they had to become very independent and resourceful because, they never knew where the next lot of money was coming from.
There were women that were survivors. They survived They didn't ask no one for nothing. They went out and made it happen to feed the children, the homes, the bad times, the war times. They didn't expect nothing for nothing. They went out and done it. And it must have been, as a be in you, I don't know, to say, I've got to do something here. I can't do it out of the kids. You went out and done it and made it happen. And you were glad at the end of the day. You were putting adrenaline through you. It was great because you thought, I've done it. I've done it.
The woman was the person who was the strong figure in the family, brought the children up very much in the kind of matriarchal sense. If you take my great-grandmother, who was originally from Dublin, and my great-grandfather was from Freetown, Sierra Leone, in West Africa, when he went to sea, he could be away for 3 years at a time. So it was my great-grandmother who brought up my great-uncle Harry and my grandmother. That's very much the flavour of Liverpool women, that they are the strong ones and always have been.
You've got accounts as early as, you know, the early part of the 19th century, you know, 1812, 13, and you have these accounts from customs officials of these hordes of women coming down to the docks. You know, they describe them of gangs of sort of 30 to 40 women coming down, and basically they're coming to pilfer from the ships. Obviously the seafarers are helping them. A ship's just come in with, you know, something like coffee on it. And obviously this is during Napoleonic Wars as well, you know, it's wartime. So the ships are coming in and the seafarers are, you know, sort of handing over, you know, very, very sort of expensive goods to the women, but the women are almost bullying their way down to the quaysides, and there's, you know, you get this image of these gangs of women, you know, and nobody's going to mess with them. The customs official is writing to the dock authority saying, look, you know, we're being harangued by these women, do something about it. There's a dock police force, but, you know, the police, you know, you might have one bloke standing there thinking, I'm not going to mess with them. And of course, again, there's a lot of women who have businesses as well at this time, right through the 19th century and earlier. You know, you've got women, again, in the Dockland areas running their own businesses.
My mother would be down from Queen Square, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock. The barrows would be getting, we'd have to wait for the barrows, 8 o'clock, the barrow. Then you went through a little street at the back of here. It's built across it now, and that's where all the barrows, people packed their handcarts. The fruit was brought in by boat. And as I say, it's getting busy here now in Cases Street. I wish I had something to sell. But they were nice mornings. They were lovely days. They were lovely days. I always feel lovely when I walk through Cases Street. It always had a feeling about it, a nice little feeling. People knew you and talking to you and that. It was great. Patsy was a good worker. She was a terrific barrel, Patsy. Chrissy. Every policeman in Liverpool knew Chrissy but us. Because poor Chrissy had left her a family of children to rear on her own, and she had to go out. She used to wait till the day her babies were born. You know, she'd be out with that barrow and she'd have that baby that night. And sadly we lost her. We lost Chrissy. But mostly, my mum was a very good living woman. Faith. I always say to my kids, the greatest thing my mother left me was my faith. An Irish faith. More, better than money. And that was, she bedded something into us. My brothers couldn't go wrong, even though she had no husband behind her. She was the saber, she was the one. She looked at you, you didn't have to hit you. You knew you had to do what she told you.
There's nobody better at mocking themselves, and there's nobody with a quicker wit than a Scouser. Well, again, I think it's got a lot to do with labour market and so on, because you're having to befriend people fairly quickly. You're suddenly thrown together working with someone on the docks that you've not met before, or on a ship. You know, you've got to make new friends instantly. It's not the same as working day after day in the factory with the same boring people telling the same things and so on. You've got to make friends very, very quickly and rapidly. So I think that's one of the things, the distinctive feature of casual labour markets with constant change of your work gang and potential mates that you're meeting there. It's that, plus, I think, if you ever go outside of Liverpool, you find things so tediously slow. That you deliberately, I think, accentuate things to say that you're not like those other woolly-backed northerners, with their terribly slow monologues and their humour, which you keep you waiting and waiting before you get to the punchline. A Scouser would want to be as quick as you possibly can be.
You hear these witty chants on the terraces of Everton and Liverpool, and I believe it stems back from people going to sea, coming back with these records and music and it being translated down onto the terraces.
It's that story about the Beatles music coming from America, from the seamen bringing it over, and then the dockers taking it up, and the dockers and seamen all of it. That's how it got into the football ground. There's no two ways about that. And I think the men going up on a Saturday afternoon, they just carried it on as if they were in a parlour. I used to call them parlours then, in a pub, and they just carried it on in the football ground.
One Saturday I was at the match, it was at Goodison, and Everton were playing Manchester United, and as usual, the Manchester people at the time giving as good as they get in terms of giving stick to us, and they were doing the usual song of On the Dole. This is in the mid-80s, and the Manchester fans, which Manchester United, were actually singing, On the Dole, on the Dole, on the Dole, which was the usual stuff which people tended to sing to Scouts at the time. When a group of guys behind me just stood up and just started holding up these £10 notes and £20 notes and started singing On the Dole in the stands, drinking scotch. It was brilliant, it was just great, and the fans just went silent.
When we're playing, say, Chelsea in Cardiff, or say West Ham in the final, their end is just like flags of St George with the hammers or whatever.
But that Chelsea one, that's the best example, isn't it?
Oh, not one, no.
Because it was literally just about 18 and 19 St George's crosses with Chelsea in the middle. Everyone the same, maybe a little team logo in the corner. And then you looked at ours and it was just everywhere.
Full of everything.
You couldn't see nothing apart from banners. Every one of them.
Don't bomb Iraq, don't bomb Iraq.
Don't bomb Iraq.
Nuke Manchester.
Liverpool has a tremendous history of protest, and that's because people have a ready access to the streets in Liverpool, or they decide to take to the streets when there's any sort of sense of grievance, or when there's an opportunity to party and celebrate, as it were.
Like Abramovich bought Chelsea, he just bought a football club, These Americans have bought more than that. They bought a whole culture. They bought fanaticism and passion, and he couldn't buy that there. And they have to understand this is a lifestyle for people here, and this is not some tin pot ice hockey team or a baseball team. This is the real deal here, And if the natives get restless, they'll have to understand that they'll end in tears.
Well, it just so happens we're playing Porto tonight, which is a seaport as well, isn't it? So it's all about that, isn't it? It's all about the traditions of seaports, and there's still that spirit in Liverpool. That spirit of you can't really do these things too easily.
Again, this comes out of the fact that Liverpool doesn't have that boring sort of industrial manufacturing factory culture that everybody getting up at the same time, clocking on at the same time, working at the same place and coming back. But Liverpool's got toings and froings going on all the time, and this makes for a far more lively street culture. So whenever there's a chance when, there are not enough police, then you really will find people coming out on the streets and making the streets their own.
%76% of our work at the last count is at night, so this is not unusual for me. It's quite magical, isn't it? Mersey Radio, Atlantic Conveyor to Mersey Radio on 12. We are now, as you can see on your radar, a beam of the Douglas platform, inbound for a 21:30 lock at Gladstone. Over.
To Conveyor Mersey, good evening to you, John. That's all copied. We'll speak to you on your approach to the bar. Over.
Thanks, Paul. I'll call you there now.
2:30 past on the bar, all copied. Speak to you now.
Thank you.
090.
I bring it to 098.
098.
Thank you. Bring it to 100.
100.
Thank you. Thank you. Steady 100. Thank you.
Steady 100.
Thank you. So we're on our way again. Okay, we can start to come to starboard now.
Mersey Radio. Good evening again, John, over.
Mersey Radio, Atlantic Conveyor, coming up a beam of the radar tower now. Paula, we'll be swinging on the port helm for Gladstone in approximately 7 or 8 minutes' time, the vessel with hazardous cargo. There you can see the one that's sticking out very clearly at the moment is the St John's Tower, sticking up there. Wonderful place to come into, Liverpool. One of the most dangerous ports in the world.
Sailors, people who are intended migrants and so on, all these people need refreshment. So it's not surprising that Liverpool has a fair number of pubs.
As with most seamen, when you've been at sea for weeks and months at a time, you tend to find that the first thing they do is get off ship, straight up to spend the money and have a few jars.
The likes of myself, who seamen, ex-seamen, dockers and what have you, we've known that many people around the city that many years that we still heard it's like moths to a flame. We all come back into the city. Mad Monday is basically just older people, as I say, like myself, who get around the city, basically on pub crawls.
Oh, Mad Monday. Well, that was the day of the hawkers, the barra women and the men took the fruit boxes back.
I mean, you start off in the city centre near the wine lodge. She's got a bit of a buzz on.
And that's when they'd all celebrate on a Monday. They'd always have a drink on a Monday.
Some of them went down Fenwick Street, the slaughterhouse, and different places, out-the-way places, as we'd call them, you know.
I used to dread Mondays with my mother. She'd always bring all the barra women back to our house on a Monday night. There'd be bottles of whiskey.
And end up back going back to where you'd probably come from, maybe to the Little Globe or the Little Coopers or somewhere like that. You may do about 6 or 7 pubs and
they tell their life stories. And I used to sit by the table. They would say, go to bed. And I'd say, I don't want to listen to them talking about when they were young and things that happened to them in life. To me, that was one of the nicest parts of my life.
Sing songs in most of them, karaoke's, and if you're not a seaman or a docker, you know, they all think they can sing anyway, like, so it is just a bit of a laugh, really. Well, I'll just give you an instance. A friend of ours was over from Australia not so long ago. So it was a Sunday, actually, you know, which in most cities is a quiet day, a Sunday. But everywhere we went, there was bands, live music on, you know, because I made a point of taking them to them type of places. You know, he couldn't believe, like, you know, that a city like Liverpool, although he'd heard that it was quite lively, he couldn't believe that on Sunday afternoon, at places with chock-a-block, with people listening to music and up dancing and everything else, you know.
You had the American music and guys with guitars, you know, sitting in the little pubs all along the waterfront, you know.
Liverpool has long been the landfall of American popular culture. I mean, when you look at Liverpool, when you look at its history, it's often better to compare it with a North American city than other places in England or Britain, because it's far more like North America, it seems to me, in many respects. And its architecture, its ethnic profile, the type of politics that we have here, all seem to be more like things you see the other side of the pond than you would see just down the road here. The whole Merseybeat thing, you know, could only have happened precisely because of those transatlantic influences and so on. You know, if it's the transatlantic influences that take Liverpool out of austerity before anybody else. They'll put it all together, but they don't just take it. They adapt it and you know, do wonderful things with it. And, well, I mean, the best example, you know, is precisely the music that comes across the Atlantic is sent back in spectacular style by 4 lads who shaped the world.
Liverpool is a city of unsung heroes, and I would say that Peter O'Halloran is one of those. He's a legendary figure, and I came across Peter in Matthew Street at a place called the Liverpool School of Music, Language, Dream and Pun, opposite the famous Grapes pub, next to the site of the cavern where the Beatles played, of course. It was a brilliant, anarchic, free-thinking institution that Peter set up with a few other Liverpudlians, based on this dream that Carl Gustav Jung had in 1927 about Liverpool, where he described Liverpool as the pool of life.
You know, we put on the first Young festivals, the first festivals in Matthew Street, actually, 1976, 77 and 78. You know, and all the groups there, you know, Deaf School, Yachts, Rugulator, that was a fantastic band, an American guy. You'd have people coming from around the world and they were looking for where the cabin was. There was one guy who said to me he'd really like to see something happen in Matthew Street to do with the Beatles. Well, we weren't really concerned with the Beatles in that way, other than historically, and I could see the value of being there. But he actually approached the council, Liverpool, a councillor, and one councillor said, we're not going to make a shrine for long-haired drug addicts. So that was the kind of mentality, the same kind of mentality that led to the place being knocked down in the first place, you know, the cavern being demolished, you know.
The conduit for all of this is the River Mersey, and the lifeblood of this area was the River Mersey.
Oh, I love the river. I mean, you know, it's like the river is the core of the city. I think it is so obvious. I mean, even when you're a few miles away from it, you can smell it and you get the sense of the river air. So you know you're in a sort of coastal city when you're here.
Well, I love the river. I have a brother. He said when I die, he's 84. When I die, told me ashes from the ferry boats on the river. He'd be over there, loved the river.
But it's the sense that working on the docks I always found within a short time, got a sense of it belonging to you. It was part of, like, it wasn't the employers there to be, you know, to be changed and all the rest of it. You had a say in what went on down there. It was a family down there. You knew everybody.
We still know it as the river. You know, still know every piece and part of the river.